very thrilled to introduce Matt Frei.
Thank you very much, Suzy. And thank you to all of you for having got out of bed early enough to see this session. I have to say that one of the great attractions of coming to this festival is that it's a safe zone from Trumpism. I thought you can escape Donald Trump because you can hear about Mughal emperors and wonderful Punjabi cooking and Rajasthani art, but the Donald pursues us these days wherever we go. Now, I want you all to engage in a sort of very short and simple mental exercise. Imagine yourself disappearing into a cave or a tunnel or a tent in the desert or an island in 2016, the beginning of, or maybe 2015, and you wake up 2 years later and you reach for your iPhone and you look at your Twitter feed and you see a tweet by a guy called Donald Trump, who is now the President of the United States, saying very unpresidential things. And you would have thought, I must have been taking some really strong recreational drugs, or someone's having taking the mickey here. It just seems, and it still seems to me today, quite incomprehensible that Trump should be the 45th president of the United States. And that's not a left-wing, right-wing judgment. That is just an extraordinary reality that I think we're still trying to get our head around, and perhaps the man himself too. But then when you look back at American history, you realize actually it's not that extraordinary. Because who would have thought that a man called Barack Hussein Obama, rhymes with Osama, would become the 44th president of the United States in the aftermath of 9/11. And he himself, when I first interviewed Barack Obama, said, I can't believe I'm on this journey because I've got this weird name. That was one of his sort of catchphrases in rallies as well. Who would vote for a guy like me, who looks like me, who sounds like me, who's got my name? That was also an extraordinary scenario, and there were plenty of people in 2006, 2007, who said, that man, is a great speaker, but he'll never be president. You dial it back, you go to George W. Bush, who was only separated from his father by one letter, the letter H. The son of George H.W. Bush, called George W. Bush, becomes president of the United States of America. He's heaved across the finishing line by the Supreme Court. A completely bonkers scenario when you think about it, because Al Gore, who was the vice president under Bill Clinton, came out of the Clinton administration with a huge budget surplus. America ruled the world. They'd won the Cold War without firing a single shot. You would have thought that Al deserved the job, but no, he didn't get it. You go back, Ronald Reagan. I don't know how many of you remember the consternation, especially in Europe and amongst Democrats in the US, that the former actor, the B actor, I mean, how scathing is that? From Hollywood, okay, became governor of California. But how is it possible that this man could become president? So my rule of thumb is that in American politics, because of the vastness and the exoticism of the political landscape you're dealing with, the extraordinary ends up becoming the ordinary. Donald Trump is now, whether you like it or not, the new normal. Now, I interviewed the guy, that is Donald J. Trump, at the end of 2013, when he was thinking about running for president. And we met in his office in Trump Tower, which is actually alarmingly elegant, tasteful, and understated. I say that alarming because when you go up to Trump Tower on the 58th floor, you are going up in a golden elevator. It is a golden elevator and you look at yourself being reflected in golden sort of mirrored light. It is like going to heaven, actually, or at least how I imagine heaven to be. And you get out on the 58th floor, and you're in an environment that is like a sort of elegant, understated corporate law office. Very nice art on the walls. Very few people around in those days. And Ivanka hovering somewhere, levitating in the background in her eminent fragrance. I mean, a very beautiful, a very accomplished, clever woman. Trump turns up, he walks. He seems to be in his own sort of weight environment. And not that he's he's heavy, but he's very tall. He's almost 6'3". And he lumbers like this from side to side. And he's like, like a gorilla occupying his space. And he came into the room, and it was me and 2 cameramen. No advisors, no press minders, which is really rare for a corporate giant, which I guess he was. And I thought that was quite impressive. So he had a little tape recorder with him, and he said, I'm going to record this conversation. And he wanted to make sure that he looked good in the monitor that was set up. So he looked at the monitor, we showed him the shot, he was happy, we started. And I began the interview by, and actually, just as a brief aside, I didn't really want to interview him. My boss in London said, I got you an interview with Donald Trump. And I said, I don't want to talk to Donald Trump. Remember, this is 2013, right? I don't want to talk to Donald Trump. What am I going to talk about? His hair, real estate, the ridiculous birther campaign against Obama, which was the beginning of his political pitch for the White House. And she said, the boss that is, go up, for Christ's sake, Frei, stop whinging, get yourself to New York and talk to this man, Donald Trump, and bring me back a decent interview. So there I was. He's sitting opposite me, the long red tie hanging over his private parts like a sporran almost. It's too, and actually, if you talk to Republicans, Republicans are very proper, and they're very upset, many of them, in fact, almost all of them, that he never does up his middle button. If you watch American legal dramas, they're always doing up their middle buttons, always very proper, sitting like this. And they're very upset by the length of his tie, which he refuses to compromise on, like everything else. So he sits there, he's got the tie, the belly, and I start off by saying, Mr. Trump, I gather you hate germs. And he says, yeah, I hate them, hate germs. And I said, and I gather, therefore, you hate shaking hands. He said, I hate shaking hands. And he didn't shake my hand as he walked in. And I said, I gather you're thinking of running for president. He said, yeah, I'm thinking about it. Well, have you thought, Mr. Trump, that you might have to shake a lot of hands on your way to the White House? And he looked at me like this. And he was trying to imagine all these grubby, germ-smeared hands across America. And clearly, the thought revolted him. And then I thought in my rather pathetic journalistic way, now comes my coup de grâce. And I put up my hand like this. And I said, why don't we practice? And the hand hovered there like a fish, like a dead fish. Smelly, but washed, I promise you. And how long can you talk to someone like Donald Trump and leave a hand in midair before it becomes deeply embarrassing? And he finally shook the hand, although for someone who's got such a reputation for rhetorical brutality, it was the most gingerly of handshakes ever, for obvious reasons, because he was afraid that if he shook it too hard, some of the Frei germs would rub off onto him and all hell would break loose. He shook the hand. We carried on the interview. And it was a long interview. We recorded about, I think, an hour and 15 minutes or something. I mean, a long, 2 tapes. And the impression I got from him was that he had serious ADHD. He found it very, very difficult to finish a sentence in the direction in which everyone thought the sentence was heading. And when he couldn't finish the sentence because he'd lost his train of thought, which was almost all the time, he then pivoted back to his comfort zone, which was the greatness of Donald Trump. So, example. So, Mr. Trump, I gather you are, you want to pick a trade fight with China. He said, yeah, China, bad. China, really bad. They're having our lunch, and I'm going to make, if I ever run, I'm going to stop that. And by the way, we have I'm thinking of a great hotel in Beijing, great hotel. And you're off in the hotel. And this happened all the time. So at the end of this interview, we picked a fight on the China thing. Actually, I said to him, if you're picking a fight with China, which underwrites America's debt, China buys more treasury bills than any other country in the world. You're basically picking a fight with your banker. That is a bad idea, is it not? And his response to that was, "You're so stupid, Frei. You're so stupid." And he was pointing at the lens, which of course is gold dust to a television journalist. That's what you want. The best thing would have been him putting his hand, but he didn't quite go that far. But there were sort of embers of charm at the same time. He was, we talked about Scotland and Scottish independence, and he was quite sort of charming, and there was the occasional smile. But they were embers that you had to fan in order to turn them into a little flame. And whenever you found them, it got aggressive again. But at the end of this interview, if you had told me that he would run for president and not flame out after a month, I would have been utterly astonished. I would have thought you were insane to make that point. So a few years later, he's now running, and I've told my bosses at Channel 4 that we need to look at Donald Trump because he's great television and he might just become the next president. And as I said those words, I fundamentally did not believe them. But then I went to my first Trump rally in North Carolina, which is a swing state. And I had never seen anything like it since the election of Barack Obama. There was a venue, a high school basketball court, which held 6,000 people, and 8,000 people queued up to see the Donald. All of them white, but not all of them poor. There was a cross-section of white America. Businessmen, bikers, hunters, men and women, I would say almost in equal numbers. And, you talk to them, and very quickly you realize that they weren't just there for the freak show to see, Donald Trump's come to town. It's like, the circus is here. Let's go and see what he has to say. He'd already resonated with them through his tweets, through his opening pitch about, stopping immigration from Mexico. And he channeled their frustration and their anger in a way that few other politicians had managed to do. And because the anger that he expressed was so unadulterated, was so brutal, was so politically incorrect, he'd locked into them. Because for them, the fact that people like Channel 4, the BBC, the New York Times, the Washington Post, New York, Seattle, coastal America, was getting upset at what he said, validated his candidacy. That's the point. What Donald Trump understood instinctively and strategically, like a sort of political genius actually, is that in today's America, which is tribal and sectarian and bitterly divided, all you need to do to win is to get your tribe on side plus one. The plus one in this case was the 80,000 votes, 80,000 votes in a nation of 310 million souls, 80,000 votes in 3 swing states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. These 3 states had not been won by a Republican since the 84 or 88 presidential elections. And Donald goes to these states, and he gets just enough votes to put him over the edge. The popular vote, as we know, he lost by 3.5 million. But he wins those 3 states by the margin that it took to get himself elected. And he understood, again, this is a really important point. We get upset about Donald's divisive rhetoric. It is precisely the divisive rhetoric, the abrogation of any responsibility for trying to unite America, that has made him such an effective politician, for now. Remember, Obama got elected because he, after a period of bruising and, the wrong war, an economy that was suffering, he said, we're not the red states, we're not blue states, we're the United States of America. Americans love the sugar high of rhetorical unity. They love it. And Trump understood that actually there's another sugar high that goes even further in certain circumstances, which is the one of rage. He was very good at being bad, right? So you then talk to these punters waiting in North Carolina to get to the basketball hall, and you say to them, what have you got in common with a billionaire from the Upper East Side? And then the answer is a very interesting combination of points. Partly, it's, well, he's rich, he's made some money, he's a businessman, he knows that, he's a winner. And we all want to be winners because guess what? Despite the fact that these statistics prove that the American dream, as the most persistent opium of the people in the United States, is dead, the opium has a lasting effect. People still believe in it. So a lot of people think, well, I could be Donald Trump one day. And I certainly respect someone who's become Donald Trump to do a better job of running the country than a professional politician. And then the other answer is, actually, I'll never be Donald Trump. And I think he's actually a bit of a son of a bitch. But he's a bully on our side. We are sick and tired of dynastic politics in the United States. Why does every president have to be called Clinton or Bush? And of course, the dirty little secret there is that guess who the first female president of the United States might be? Ivanka Trump. It's perfectly possible. You see, you laugh. Remember what I said at the beginning, the most extraordinary scenario, that's the one you should be putting your money on. Now, when covering the Trump presidency, when dealing with him as president of the United States, partly because of the rhetoric that he employed to get there, partly because of the way that he governs, it is useless to think of modern American presidents. What you have to think of is Henry VIII, or maybe, the Nawab of Jaipur, I'm making this up, in the 14th century. Someone who effectively, Mad King Donald, runs a court in Washington, surrounded by incredibly clever, successful people, who all think that they can tame the Donald. A bit like sort of, a girlfriend with an aggressive boyfriend. Darling, I know how to deal with him. Don't worry about me. I know how he likes to take his food. I can talk him down from the cliff. And sometimes we feel that these very clever people, Rex Tillerson, Mad Dog Mattis, who's the sanest man in the White House, can actually talk him off the cliff, can prize the iPhone away from him. Or perhaps Ivanka, the Lucretia Borgia of today's White House. And then again, you think, well, maybe not, because he has a good day. Like in Davos the other day, he gave a very nice emollient speech. He read from auto-cue. It had been written for him by Gary Cohn, former senior partner at Goldman Sachs. Now he's chief economic advisor. This is a man who, like many others in the White House, fundamentally wants to tame Donald Trump and believes that Donald Trump, in his essence, is the best thing that's happened to America for a very long time, partly because of his tax cuts, economic regeneration, kick some ass abroad and all that kind of stuff. But also, they're deeply embarrassed by the way he doesn't eat with a knife and fork, if you permit the metaphor, by the way that he's not clubbable. They want him to be someone that the rest of the world respects, and he isn't. So trying to second guess what King Donald is up to this morning, who he will slay, who he will behead, and the modern version of beheading, of course, is sending that vicious tweet at 4 in the morning or 5 in the morning whenever he wakes, and he sends a lot of them from bed, which is perhaps never a good idea. That's what the world hinges on. None of us, unless you're American here, none of us voted for him, but we all have skin in the game. Right? We depend on what happens in that White House. It's not the Vegas thing. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. What happens in Washington definitely does not stay in Washington. Now, to get an insight into how the man ticks, how any man ticks, well, actually, any woman ticks, there's only one real source you go to, even more than the man or woman himself, and that is you go to their butler. So Donald had a butler for almost 30 years called Anthony Salazar. And we tracked Anthony down in West Palm Beach last year when we were doing another documentary about Donald Trump. Anthony retired. He left Trump on very good terms and now is the kind of concierge at the most expensive antique shop in West Palm Beach. This antique shop, which is in a kind of aircraft hangar on the outskirts of town, when you walk into it, it's like walking into a concentrated version of Versailles. Imagine all the mirrors and gold and chandeliers of Versailles squeezed into one airport hangar. You literally come in and you have a seizure with all the gold and mirrors. And Anthony's there with his waxed mustache, slightly camp. He guides you in. And I said to him, does Donald Trump ever come? He said, all the time. All the time. Loves the gold, loves the mirrors. You can't make it up. I thought, really, is that so? And tell me a little bit, so you worked for him for 30 years in Mar-a-Lago in the White House in the Sun, which is just down the road. what was it like? And he said, well, he was a great boss. I loved him. He was a fantastic boss. And I said, well, tell me about, his habits. So Donald Trump, and we know this from other sources now, and I heard it first from Anthony, who was alarmingly open about all this, said that Trump eats mainly by himself, mainly in his bedroom, at a chair that is placed at the end of the bed in front of the television screen. He is a TV dinner addict. What does he eat? Never, ever a vegetable. Never, ever a leaf of salad. No carrot sticks for the Donald. It's either burgers, chicken wings from Kentucky Fried Chicken, or very well done steak. Now the steak, when it's well done, poses a germaphobe like Donald with a serious problem. Because as the steak is carried from the kitchen through the corridors of Mar-a-Lago, which is a vast estate, through various doors, the steak, when it's well done, curls up at the edges and it rotates on the plate like a frisbee. Now, Anthony told me that when the steak was delivered to the Donald in his bedroom and the silver hood, whatever you call that thing, was lifted, and it always had to be served with a silver thing, if the steak had been seen to have moved to the side of the plate, thus touching the silver hood, it was, and I'm not making this up because you couldn't make it up, it was deemed to have been contaminated and then had to be sent back to the kitchen for another steak to be made. So Anthony said although he didn't like mashed potato very much, we developed the mashed potato mattress for the steak. So a dollop of mashed potato that is invisible, on which the steak is then plonked, firmly glued to the plate so that it doesn't rotate, was the secret to Anthony's happy life. What does he drink? Well, Trump never drinks any alcohol. His older brother, who he had a very interesting relationship with, because he admired him because the older brother was better looking, hard to imagine, but better looking, and more sociable, more popular actually with the girls, but was also a deeply unhappy character because he didn't get on with the tyrannical father, Fred Trump. And the older brother, also called Fred, became an alcoholic. And he died at the age of 43. And which gave Donald the opening to lead the family business. But it also means that Donald Trump has never drunk a single drop of alcohol in his life. And he doesn't smoke. And you kind of wish that he did drink occasionally, because it would make him a little bit more relaxed. But what he does drink, this is again, Anthony is my source for this, is a lot of Diet Coke. And what he does is he orders up 6 cans of Diet Coke with every meal. Now, don't be alarmed, ladies and gentlemen. He does not drink all 6 cans. He only drinks 3. And he drinks the 3 where the date of expiry is closest to the date of consumption for some reason. So there has to be a sort of synergy there of dates. And I didn't even know that Diet Cokes had a date of expiry. I thought they would basically outlast us all. Even little green men would find cans of Diet Coke. But anyway, that's his thing. So he looks at the date. He's verified the date. He's happy. He drinks those 3 cans. And then Anthony also said that he has good days and bad days in terms of his mood. On bad days, he would wear a red cap, and on good days, he would wear a white cap. Now, that I didn't believe, because actually he only ever wore a red cap, and I didn't see him wear a white cap. But he is not very sociable. He barely shared a meal with his wife. He didn't go out to see friends very often. He was by himself with his phone, with his Twitter feed, and with his television screen, not watching movies, but watching Fox television. In those days, he also watched MSNBC, the liberal cable channel, although he's shunned that one. And, interesting little insight, he watched Citizen Kane 27 times. He is obsessed with Citizen Kane. You can see why, right? We're going to get to questions in a minute, but just one brief little other sort of historical insight. Trump, of course, came to prominence right at the beginning of his campaign because his pitch was to kick out all these Mexicans who are rapists and murderers, and some of them, I believe, are good men. Okay. But that resonated with many people in the crowd, in that crowd. And he definitely appeals to white America. He is a billionaire from Fifth Avenue. But he's also the classic product of an American immigrant story. Donald Trump's grandfather, called Friedrich Trump, came from the small German town of Kallstadt in the Rhineland-Palatinate. From a relatively poor family, they had vineyards, but they weren't producing a lot of wine, or not enough wine to kind of keep the family in the style that they thought they might be accustomed to. And so Trump's sister first emigrated to the United States, and then Trump himself. He arrived in America at the age of 16. And he worked for a barber in New York, and then he went out west. And he became really successful. Friedrich Trump made quite a lot of money by going into the restaurant trade, then the hotel trade, and together with that, the flesh trade. So he basically set up brothels, hotels that catered to every miner's desire, on the gold rush trade between Washington State and Canada. He also then, rather brilliantly, the famous Dead Horse Trail, where a lot, horses died because they were, driven to their death in the middle of winter. He turned the dead horses into burgers. He became a dead horse burger salesman. He was literally, flogging dead horses to the miners, and made, in today's money, about $700,000. And with that money, he went back to Kallstadt in Germany, and he married his childhood sweetheart, Elisabeth Christ, who was, I think, 8 years younger than him, but they were next-door neighbors. She was very pretty. He remembered, the parents kept sending pictures of her. And he married her, and then they went back to America with this money, and she hated it. She hated America. And he hated America, too, because he really wanted to be back in Germany. What he wanted to do with the $700,000 is buy an inn somewhere in Kallstadt, a little restaurant, maybe not as a brothel. He wasn't going to sell dead horse burgers, but just go into the hospitality trade. And for 4 years, Donald Trump's grandfather fought the Bavarian authorities, who were then running the Rhineland-Palatinate, in order to fight extradition. And they basically threatened him with an expulsion order because they said, you did not do your military service. You dodged the draft, Friedrich Trump. Therefore, you've got to get out. And if you look at the State Archive in Speyer, there are these wonderful documents that document the legal battles of Frederick Trump, the grandfather, against the Regency of Bavaria, with wonderful sort of, garlanded, twirly handwriting. And the final document on sort of yellowed paper is, dear Mr. Trump, sehr geehrter Herr Trump, if you don't leave by the 4th of May, we're going to just throw you out. So get out of the country. And he did. With his wife in tears, very unhappy. They get to America. 2 years later, he's dead. And she then takes over the running of the business, which is still, hotels, and then they get into the property business. And then the father takes over. And Donald Trump's origins, there's a lot of money said about he's a billion, he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, which is true. He was given, we think about $10 million by his father, which is a lot of money. This is Donald I'm talking about. And a credit line from Fred, the father's bank. But actually, if you want to understand the kind of the psychology of Donald Trump, you have to look at where he came from. Not just his grandfather, but also his house in Queens, New York, which is quite an ordinary house, actually. And Donald always looked at the skyline of Manhattan, and his father always said to him, that's other people's territory. We don't do real estate in Manhattan. We do it in Queens and in Brooklyn. He was what the New Yorkers, the Manhattan crowd, called rather scathingly a bridge and tunnel boy, from the wrong side of the tracks. Still a millionaire, but the wrong side of the tracks. So when Donald Trump is bold enough and old enough and rich enough to conquer Manhattan, he does so literally with a vengeance. He doesn't just build the tallest tower, he plonks his name in supersized letters on it, over and over again. But he doesn't engage with the Upper East Side crowd in the way that others do. He doesn't go to charity balls. I interviewed Jay McInerney, the writer, a few years ago, or actually last year, and I said, did you ever, and Jay's sort of very, he's part of the whole kind of upper crust scene and on the Upper East Side. And he said, we never see the Donald at any of these events. We've never seen him. He doesn't come. He doesn't give any money. He doesn't give any money to charity. And in America, the great lubricant of social upward mobility when you're rich is give money to charity, philanthropy. The Donald Trump Theater, the Donald Trump, hospital, the Donald Trump Library. No, we have the Donald Trump Hotel, a lot of them. We have Donald Trump condos, and we've got Donald Trump golf courses, and we also have Donald Trump steaks, mineral water, wine, you name it, probably balsamic vinegar. And what Donald Trump realized, that the most important thing, actually, in business is not building. He's not a builder. He's not Bob the Builder, Donald the Builder. He built quite a few things in the early and late 80s and early 90s, and he overbuilt. He overextended, and he then almost went bankrupt. And what he then realized is that actually the most important thing is trump the brand name. And if you're in a licensing business, the way this works is that you say, okay, Suzy, you want to make steaks? You want to sell steaks? It's going to be tough to sell steaks, but you put my name on those steaks, you're going to sell those steaks. So I'm going to sell you my name, the Frei steak. You're going to give me $1 million, and then you're going to sell steaks worth maybe $300,000. You're going to go bust. But it doesn't matter because I get the money up front. And that's what he's done over and over again. It's about the name. It's about the brand. And that is, in a sense, what we're getting with this presidency. It's a brand preservation exercise on a global and historic scale. And so I'm going to end with this final question, to which we're all awaiting the answer. This is a question posed on Inauguration Day, when he gave one of the most divisive and abrasive speeches, the most divisive and abrasive speech ever given by a newly minted president. The question in my mind was, and the mind of many of us watching it, is he going to change America, or is America going to change him? We know one part of that question. We know that so far America has not changed Donald Trump. Apart from the occasional emollients on auto cue, he is essentially the same person he was 2 years ago. America elected exactly what it got. The question is, can he change America? Is American democracy going to survive this experiment? Anyway.
I have a few questions for Matt myself, and then I want to open it up to the rest of you because I'm sure you have a lot of questions for him. I often think about climate change scientists, that I wonder what their lives are like because they are the ones with the information about what is actually happening to the environment. And do they wake up in the middle of the night and in sweats, and are they constantly in feeling of terror that the world is going to end? And as someone who knows Trump very well now and has information that maybe we don't have, I wonder if sometimes you feel that way, or if you felt that way after the election. What would be the thing that worries you about him the most?
I think the thing that worries me most about him is temperament. It's the combination of narcissism, which he, I think, admits to. I mean, when I interviewed him, I said, "Are you a narcissist?" And he said, "Yes, I suppose I am." And so he's a self-confessed narcissist with a very short temper and an even shorter attention span. And I think when you're dealing with very complex issues, whether it's climate control or whether it's Afghanistan, the nature of terrorism, that's really worrying. Because even if he doesn't know the detail himself, he has to be able to listen to his advisors who will tell him enough detail for him to form a decision that is based in judgment. And judgment not just dependent on, ego opinion polls. Because Donald Trump, as a businessman, likes to measure things. He wants to measure things so he gets some sort of hold of them with a number. And the thing he likes to measure most is the metric of his own success. And sometimes you can't do that. You can't, opinion poll ratings, which he doesn't measure at the moment because they're lousy for him. But you can't measure things like, how's the Afghanistan war going to turn out? How is climate change going to turn out? Up to a point you can. But it's also a slightly more nebulous sense of judgment. And I think that he lacks. And he combines that with one hell of a temper. That is not something that has conspired to make me feel very comfortable.
Also, there's been some speculation and there's been some reporting that has come out recently about whether or not he actually wanted to win or thought he was going to. Where do you fall on this? I mean, I think when we all saw his face when he did win, he looked kind of pale and shocked. I think that's what was going on. And we heard that his wife cried when she heard, because she wasn't expecting that she was going to have to go through with this. Is this true?
I think that Donald doesn't do anything without feeling that he will win. Mm-hmm. I think he thinks of himself as one of life's natural winners. But even you can do that. You can have that kind of Trump Tower-sized ego while also having some doubts. And I think he must have gone through, moments of doubt in the run-up to Election Day, or actually in the run-up to the moment that James Comey decided to reopen the email files into Hillary. Until then, I think he thought, although I'm a natural winner, I will be deprived of my God-given, Trump-given right to win the White House by either, Hillary's dirty tricks, election kind of fiddling. He was kept coming up with excuses why he wouldn't be able to deliver the homework on time, sir, over and over again. And suddenly he wins. So I think that must have come as a shock. But I was at the rally in New Hampshire, where he announced to the crowd that James Comey had just opened the inquiry again into Hillary's emails. And he sensed that this might be his opening to victory, because he realized that in that ridiculous email accusation, all the things that people were suspicious over Hillary about, the entitlement, the privacy, doing it your own way, no full disclosure, all that stuff, a lot of it which is unfair, but she should have known that that would be used against her. At that moment, this kicked in for him again, and he realized, this is my path to victory, and he was right.
There has been a kind of ferocious debate in the U.S. about what exactly happened with this election, and so you hear a number of analyses. You hear, okay, Hillary lost because she's a woman, so there's the gender issue. You hear Trump won because America is racist, and you also hear that Trump won because there was this kind of class divide and this that a lot of people were suffering in the U.S. economically. So there was race, gender, class. How do you tend to think about what was the most prominent issue in this election?
I think all those things were correct, but there were lots of other candidates who were, either misogynist or, obviously Hillary was, very pro women, obviously. So that kind of, I don't know. It's difficult to say. Let me sum it up like this. I think what Trump understood was that America was still living through an insurgent era. Obama was an insurgent candidate. He came from outside to conquer the American political landscape. Trump was the most obvious insurgent candidate in an era of insurgency. And Hillary Clinton, not because of her gender, but because of her name, wasn't an insurgent candidate. However fresh and new and different she wanted to sound, her very experience, the very fact that she had been Secretary of State, First Lady, Senator for New York, made her a member of the ruling class, gave her an aura of entitlement that America was fed up with. I mean, there's one amazing fact. And I interviewed her a few months ago when she was launching her book in London, and I asked her about this, and she didn't really have an answer. I said, despite the fact that Trump was openly, brazenly misogynistic, had been accused of sexual harassment, had been accused of things which are much worse than the things that Hollywood stars and directors are being axed for right now, being whitewashed out of their movies. He was able to get away with it against a female candidate who in the end got 1% less of the female vote in America than Barack Obama. Now that is extraordinary, to which she did not have an answer.
We were discussing this a little bit before, but it's interesting because we were discussing whether you think that the election of Donald Trump will dispel for Americans the idea of their own exceptionalism. Is this the end of that idea? Or do you see that it could be reasserted even stronger in opposition to Donald Trump as a way of saying, oh, that's not us, It
depends who you are. I mean, if you're, a Republican billionaire who wants to save a few pennies, and you've been made very happy indeed by Donald Trump, or you are, you know, a white blue-collar worker who's been laid off in the, you know, in the Deep South or in the Rust Belt, then America's exceptionalism has been underpinned by the election of Donald Trump. You're more exceptional than ever, because you get to elect a dude who's never been a general or a politician. He's a businessman, and now he's running the most powerful country in the world. And by the way, he's telling the North Koreans the way it is. That is exceptional. Yep. Yeah. But if you live in New York, or you live in Seattle, or in Washington, D.C., then, you know, this could be the end of exceptionalism. My own view, and we talked about this over coffee yesterday, I think America's biggest problem is its sense of exceptionalism. I mean, America has to understand, with China rising as the new rival power, possibly overtaking America in the next 20 years, with Europe going its own way up to a point, India rising as well as a rival power, that American exceptionalism no longer works. America is part of, you know, the global roller coaster of empires rising and falling. And Obama, I think, understood that what America needs to do is manage decline. And what Trump is trying to do is preserve greatness, make America great again.
Say there is no decline.
There is no, but there is decline. I mean, but it doesn't have to be bad decline. I mean, decline works quite well sometimes, but you have to fess up to it.
And did you get the sense, you mentioned something very fascinating about how obviously what happens in Washington affects everybody, and I live in Turkey, and I would hear this from Turks as well. But do you get the sense that Americans know this, that they realize that the rest of the world is subjected to their president? Do they seem conscious of that?
It depends who you talk to. Yeah. You know, I mean, there are any number of Americans you meet in Istanbul or Rome or Paris or London who've become a tribe of self-hating Americans. They walk into a dinner party and they apologize about being American. I'm really sorry, I'm American. Got nothing to do with Donald Trump. I'm sure you're not one of those. but then you get other Americans, you know, possibly more Americans who feel that the world has misunderstood them. And it has. I mean, in Britain, we think that we know America. Again, our poison that we should be weaning ourselves off is the ridiculous special relationship. In Britain, we have this thing where we think that we're America's best buddy. We're the prom queen that that Donald Trump is always going to notice. Nonsense. My eye-opener for that was during the run-up to the Iraq War, when Don Rumsfeld, who, by the way, always worked upright like Virginia Woolf, he stood at his desk, he never sat down, because it would somehow waste time. Literally weeks before the war, when Tony Blair had already mobilized thousands of troops, they were in Kuwait waiting to go into Iraq. He had faced mass opposition in the Labour Party, protests on the streets of London. Jeff Hoon, who was then the Defense Secretary, rang Donald Rumsfeld and said, by the way, Mr. Rumsfeld, we've got that minor little embarrassment of the vote in Parliament. And once we've done that, we'll be okay. And Rumsfeld said, Jeff, forget about the vote in Parliament. We can do it by ourselves. It's okay. Thanks, but no thanks. You know, we can't deal with this sort of nonsense at the moment. Parliamentary votes. They'd had, you know, we just go in. And suddenly Britain realized that actually it was completely dispensable in this exercise. We were the fig leaf in the coalition of the willing. Because if you just had Samoa and Honduras and Bulgaria, that wasn't much of a coalition of the willing. You needed Britain on your side. We're the Sancho Panza to America's Don Quixote, always by their side. And of course, prime ministers then say, well, no, actually, no, we'll be loyal but not slavish. I remember David Cameron when he came to America for his first trip. And he had this whole thing, we'll be loyal but not slavish. When he was told by the White House staff that he was not just going to travel on Air Force One, but on Marine One, on the helicopter, he was like a puppy. He was so excited. Oh my God, we're going on the chopper, it's marvelous. And the ambassador was jumping up and down with excitement. Everyone was excited. He's going on the helicopter. He's going on the helicopter. He's going on the helicopter. And then they flew to this basketball game in Ohio. This is with Barack. And there was this hilarious scene. In the halftime, or whatever you have in basketball games, you know, the interval, this former basketball player who's very tall did an interview with both Barack Obama, the president, and then David Cameron said, you know, Barack Obama, was the president. And then David Cameron, His Excellency, David Cameron, and he gave all his middle names, and then his full title as if no one had ever heard of the guy, which they hadn't, because they still thought he was called Tony Blair. And then at the end of this interview, in which Cameron was literally asked one question, the camera, Cameron was then left by himself, and the camera veered. It's the pool camera, which is always on the president in case he gets shot, sort of wandered by itself on the tripod from this enormous scrum around Barack Obama of students getting an autograph to this guy standing by himself on his tippy toes looking out, and it was David Cameron, our Prime Minister. And I ended my television piece that night with that image, and I did not get a Christmas card that year.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Matt. This was fascinating. We can open it up to the floor.
Okay. Yes, you please.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hello, thank you for allowing me to ask. Matt, my question is that, Barack Obama knew that he can't be the president, obviously, because 8 years. So do you think that he should have implemented measures where, people can't deny climate change or can't be unscientific? Like, thanks to America, at least finally you guys allowed same-sex marriage, in developed countries. Like, America is not just racist, as Suzy said, it is also highly religious, which is quite surprising. Europe, if you see, is so unreligious.
So what's your question?
My question is, should Obama have done things so that scientific temperament does not go down? Because everybody looks to America. In India, people are so religious, superstitious, pseudoscience is big. So should Obama, if the Democratic camp comes up again, maybe then at least they should have implemented things?
I think I don't think he could have done anything to make America think more scientifically. I mean, a lot of America thinks very scientifically, as you know. It's at the cutting edge of all sorts of sciences. But ultimately, the problem with climate change is that it's been poisoned by politics. Climate change is seen by much of America through the prism of politics. And in a way, the greatest disservice, unwittingly, to the science of climate change has been done by the very man who's become known as the czar of climate change, Al Gore, because Al Gore was the Democrat vice president, was the ally of that, the evil Bill Clinton. Republicans, because it's come through Al Gore, because of the inconvenient truth, even those who are scientifically minded often say, well, this is just something that's kind of proffered by the Hollywood elite and by Al Gore. They spit out that name, and that's why we don't really believe it, because it's just cooked up. So yes, there is a sort of climate of conspiracy, but ultimately a president can't change that. You can come up with the arguments over and over again, but people have to convince themselves through other means as well. Okay. Gentleman with the glasses.
What's your take on the whole Russia business? Is he Putin's man? If you had to take a bet on that, how's the inquiry going to turn out?
I did a whole documentary about this, and we only have 10 minutes left, so I'm going to keep this very, very short. The Russia-Putin thing is fascinating, not so much because there is a single smoking gun. And we looked into this, and maybe we just didn't find it. But it's fascinating because Putin and Trump are very alike. They don't necessarily believe in freedom of speech. They don't believe in the rule of law. They don't believe in an independent judiciary. But Putin, I think, and I've heard this from people who work for Putin, is very frustrated that Trump engages in the same philosophy of government in a very clumsy way. They are very upset with Trump because he's not an effective partner, mainly because he's not so far managed to repeal sanctions. Congress keeps buttering on new sanctions that Donald once said he would like to see repealed, but he's not done that. So if he was, to some extent, helped across the finishing line by the Kremlin, it hasn't worked for the Russians. So they're deeply disappointed. The question for Trump is, did he help him across, was he helped across the finishing line, and will he get caught for doing so? And again, I don't think that is the case. I think Hillary Clinton is convinced that if the Russians hadn't been involved, she would now be president because of those 80,000 votes in 3 swing states. I don't think that's necessarily true. And I think Democrats indulge in that fantasy at their own peril, because what they should be looking at is their own failings. Why did we not come up with a candidate who resonated with the kind of America that we are supposed to represent? The problem for Trump will be the Mueller inquiry, and it could be like Al Capone, who was done for tax evasion. It's possible that Donald Trump could be found guilty, and I'll explain guilty in a minute, by the Mueller inquiry because they're looking into everything that Trump has got up to in business terms in the last 20 years. And you don't, even if you're Mother Teresa, forgive Mother Teresa, and you're doing New York real estate, you will have buried some bodies somewhere, right? The cement business in New York is brutal. It involves the mob, whether you like it or not. It involves kickbacks and paybacks and favors, and that is just the way it works. And that is where Donald thrived for 2 decades. There's bound to be a skeleton somewhere. Now, Mueller may find that skeleton. I think you can be almost certain that he'll find something, whether it's Russia-related or not, that will be damaging to Donald Trump. So the question is, and I'm always asked this, is it enough to lead to impeachment? Could this lead to the end of Donald Trump? And my judgment is no, because it is a political trial that would remove a sitting president in Congress. Unless the Democrats win a majority in the House of Representatives, which is not a given, and there are 2/3 of senators who decide to remove him, which has never happened before, he will be president for another, until the next election, and then he will run again, and I would put money on him possibly winning again. Lady with the glasses over there. Yes, no glasses, sorry.
Thank you. We all know, anybody who knows history knows that Americas belong to the 500 tribes that lived there. We call them Native Americans or Indians, I don't know why. Why nobody rises when people like Trump or, this certified moron like Richard Spencer says America belongs to white?
Yeah.
It never belonged to white people. So why nobody rises? The natives or any powerful white on behalf of the natives rises up and say, it doesn't belong to us. We are guests here, and let us live nicely, happily together.
Right. I mean, if you're asking about Native Americans and why they're not more engaged in the political process, I mean, I don't know the answer to that, but I think a lot of it has to do with long-term marginalization, self-marginalization. I mean, it is astonishing to me, but there are very few prominent Native American politicians active, in the political sphere. If you're asking about other minorities, well, they are becoming, more engaged. I mean, Barack Obama was the triumph of minorities, of the new America. In, I think it's 15 years' time, whites in America will be the biggest minority. So that is what Trump is fighting against. But at the same time, look at the Hispanic community of the United States. These people were insulted directly by Donald Trump over and over again. He opened the doors to anti-Hispanic racism, for want of a better word. Hispanic election workers I spoke to were, worked harder than ever before to make sure that Hillary Clinton, who's not someone that they naturally liked, actually, would get elected. And yet, the margin of Hispanic votes who voted for Trump was quite high. That's astonishing. So there are things going on here that we don't understand. Maybe they were impressed by his embodiment of the American dream. He was a rich guy. They want to be rich. Maybe they were impressed by his racism against blacks. There's lots of intra-minority racism going on in America as well. Yes, you gentlemen.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll sit down. Sure, please, yeah. How does a billionaire who was born a billionaire, is a completely incompetent businessman, is still very rich? How does he appeal to people making $7 to $11 an hour?
Well, no, this is a very good question. It is a question I literally asked every Trump voter I came across. And they essentially, although they didn't put it quite like this, what they essentially said is, we like him because he's so much richer than we are. Because one day we think that we might be as rich, or even as a tenth as rich would be good enough for us. And because he's a winner, because he embodies success, and he's done so off his own steam, we think that he might be able to fix politics. Now, to me, that's a complete misunderstanding of the tools that you need in order to fix politics. Because to fix politics in Washington especially, you need to understand how politics works, and Donald Trump doesn't understand that. But to a lot of voters, the very fact that he wasn't part of the Washington political landscape that he was this obscenely rich man who flaunted his wealth was the thing that made him attractive to them. So never, if you're running for president in America, I'm not sure if you are, but don't hide your wealth, ever. Flaunt it. Flash it about. Yes, gentleman over there, and then gentleman over there.
What's happening is that if you see the current US economy, it's doing pretty well. The growth rates are probably one of the highest. The stock markets are booming.
Yeah.
So is there a likelihood that because of all this for the next 2-3 years, Trump might be returning back again, though a lot of it might not be his own doing?
I think that's a very good question. So a lot of people assume that he would never, if he did run, he wouldn't get re-elected. I just said that I think if he did run, he probably would get re-elected. And a lot of it depends on, the many known unknowns. What state will be in? Will there be a war with North Korea? Will we be at war with Iran? We don't know any of this stuff yet. Although if we are at war with other countries, or America is, the likelihood is actually that you keep the commander-in-chief in place. That was always George Bush's calculation, and it worked for him. In terms of the economy, the tax cuts that have barely been reported on, but are fundamentally important to understanding why Donald Trump might actually end up being a success in America's eyes, are huge, because this is what the Republicans have tried to do for the last 15 years, and they've failed. He's succeeded. These tax cuts help people who earn more than $2 million a year, much more than they help people who earn less than $75 a year. Right? But I get back to my previous answer. In America, the American dream, despite all the statistics, is still an incredibly potent poison. People believe in it. They swallow the stuff. They drink the Kool-Aid, even though they're never going to be millionaires at the end of the day. They're drowning in mortgage and working 2 jobs. They are the working poor. But they think they can get there. And if the billions of dollars that have been saved by corporations in these tax cuts can be fueled back into the economy, are actually there to create jobs, which is what Donald Trump has promised, if that is going to happen, it could have a positive effect on America's economy. But the more likely scenario is that actually that money will be invested elsewhere and that the country will become even more divided. So we end up with exactly the same problem we had that got Donald Trump elected in the first place. Okay. One more, and then I think we've got to go.
Matt, to your question, will Trump damage America? Of course he has, and he will. And he will damage, to some extent, the relationship with the Allies. But Democrats all over the states, and the big cities particularly, say, don't forget, America is always bigger than one man. And he's hedged about by some very experienced advisors. He may lose the majority in one of the houses. I think he may end up being more and more limited in the damage that he can make. Do you agree with that?
I think I do. We're already seeing this process. We're seeing the softening of Donald Trump's edges. His speech in Davos the other day was really quite a reasonable speech, although the message essentially was the same. It was America first. Again, we've got literally no seconds left. So to sum up, I would say we all have to get used, whether we're in London or Paris or Berlin or in Delhi, that America first, which has to some extent been the guiding principle for many years now, will be the reality. The question for the world is, will it also be America alone? And America alone fundamentally distorts, possibly destroys, the geopolitical arrangement that has kept peace and prosperity more or less spreading throughout the world since the Second World War.
Thank you so much. I think that's all we have time for. Thank you so much, Matt. It was fascinating. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matt Frei and Suzy Hansen. They'll both be signing the books. You can grab your copies right here by the book signing area, and they'll be right there.